Soulless Dead, Chapter 8, Raining Bullets, Part 2. As we sat there in the lower part of the stairwell, I started to think to myself, why do people do what they do? What's the point in even trying to survive at this point? With no law to keep people like this from doing what they're doing. With no food trucks to keep us fed. With nothing to keep us comfortable. What was the point? I know it's sort of an American bratty, nihilist look at things, but we got so comfortable with everything being given to us that, man, in adversity we all break down at some point. I'm not going to be that jack of all trades like in the movies or in the comics that can just handle things like this. I'm just a realistic fat kid that grew up at his parents' house. Between the pain I already had from before, making life very difficult, not being able to find a decent job and have a good life, it made it really difficult to wonder if I really had what it took to survive in this world and if I really wanted to in the first place. It's funny that you have people that will run around and hurt as many people as they want, and they can never really give you a valid reason. It's always simple. Too simple in our minds, because I wanted to see how far I could get away with it. Stupid reasons. Reasons all the more to punch those sons of bitches in the mouth and break their teeth. Just to downplay them skinning somebody or shooting a bunch of people or bombing a hotel and killing lots of kids. Flying a plane into a building to have sex in the afterlife, to get laid. It makes you wonder. Convincing a bunch of kids that it's okay to kill and then saying that you really had nothing to do with it. Yeah, we've all heard these kind of people. The one thing I remember when I was a kid, I was watching a Dateline, and it was two teenagers that wanted to experiment what it was like to murder somebody. One of their closest friends, I don't remember her name, we'll just go with Amy at this point. I know it's a little disrespectful to not remember the dead, but at this point it doesn't matter. They were good friends with this young lady and her boyfriend, who was a close friend of theirs too. They had been making a small film documentary on their cell phones talking about murdering people. Nobody really knew about it other than them, but they had decided it was going to be Amy, and one night they go to her house in their car and go there and stab her and her boyfriend, who just so happened to be there. Felt bad for that poor bastard. He was just there trying to hang out with his girlfriend, and then here come these two punks. They had the balls to walk in and just kill somebody they knew. A family friend, as a matter of fact. Just because they wanted to know what it was like. As I watched this video on this, it just made me more disgusted and more angry. It made my blood rush, boil, made my brain turn to a pool of acid. How somebody could just do this because they wanted to, because they were curious. Made the realization of the situation I was already in more and more real, and it just made me more angry. They didn't actually videotape them killing him, but they got back in the car and they were all excited, like, oh my gosh, we can't believe we just did it, it was so awesome. Like it was some sort of achievement to kill innocent kids. It was hard for me to watch the first Hunger Games watching that, even though it wasn't real, and that the story actually ends on a good note. I still had problems watching that, let alone seeing it in reality, watching children kill other children because they want to know what it's like. Punk high school boys that think that they're all that. Well, I'm happy to say that they're in prison for murder and homicide. They were caught. God, I wish they would have given them the death penalty. My age, I was, a punk kid with a firebrand attitude that kill anybody who kills anybody who wants to kill people for no reason. But I stopped and thought, would it give them the satisfaction to be known as those kids? And I stopped and waited and thought, maybe if they just died without names, it would probably be better. Maybe if they died without being remembered, it would have somehow taken the honor away from them killing that person. But if I am right about heaven and hell, I was really crossing my fingers that they'd be burning in a lake of lava. Of course, then again, this was the younger kid in me. This wasn't the older guy that wanted everybody to be saved. Hell's too bad for anyone, to be honest. And Penn Jillette once said that how much do you have to hate someone to want them to go to hell, but it sure is hard to disregard that, disregard everything that you've been taught when you're being shot at or when you're trying to be hurt or someone's trying to kill you just for the sake of sport. Because no one can stop them, no one can slap them on the wrist. It makes you wonder if you're just cattle. Just target practice. Heck, I likened it to when I was a little younger. My little brothers used to go out with their pellet guns and shoot squirrels and birds and kill them for no reason. I used to get so pissed because I love animals and I like to hunt, but there's an honor behind it. You have to eat what you kill. They just leave them there dead, and it just bothered me. Just killing for sport isn't right, in my opinion. I think you should eat them. At the same time, it makes me feel like the zombies are in a similar situation. They're killing out of necessity, out of instinct. These boys were killing just for fun, and I liken them to the man that is now throwing grenades down the hallway trying to kill us. He's already killed one of our party members and injured two of us. Can't imagine what Jeff was thinking. Either we're dying or we're bleeding out, or that man's already cut our throats. There was a time of silence for quite a bit. We sat and waited. It was quiet. The gunshot started again. It was a standard bolt-action rifle. We could even hear him racking the bolt. Now was our chance. I told Orville we had to be very careful how we did this, and one of us might get shot. At this point, we had waited so long that he probably thought we were dead. Either that or he set up an explosive to intercept us if we tried to do anything from behind. We never knew, but we had to test it. We slowly started to get up and creep our way to the second level between where we were at and the top floor door to get on the roof. We made our way up there and we noticed that the roof was made of gravel, which kind of threw out the whole getting up behind him and jumping him thing. We just had to shoot him where he was at. He was trying to turn to my side, and I aimed at his hands where he was holding his gun, and Orville aimed at the back of his legs. We looked at each other, and we told Jeff to start shooting. As soon as we did that, the walkie-talkie made a screech, and as he was turning, Orville blew his legs with a nice 12-gauge buckshot right to the back of his legs. It dropped him, and I shot him in the hands. It was kind of cool to see his bones protruding out of his hands and getting the gun blown out. It, of course, fell to the lower streets below. It would have been funny and interesting if one of that gun ended up killing something down there. Would have made the work a lot easier for us. The man sat there writhing, holding his hand in one, and his legs were curled from the pain and the fact that there were buckshots stuck in the back of his legs. We walked up to him, and he started to draw his pistol. I pulled out my revolver again and shot him in the other arm. One of his hands was already blown up. We then picked him up by his arms and slammed him up against the wall and put our guns to his wrists. Just like in Boondock Saints. We told him if he valued his life, he'd explain to us why the hell he was doing what he was doing. He looked at us with a snicker, pain wincing. He looked at us because he told us that all his life he'd been a prison guard in a tower. He saw all kinds of people walk through there, murderous rapists, child molesters. He never got a chance to shoot one of them. People that actually deserved to die. He didn't get so much as to rack a bolt once. He told us he was a champion shooter from a little kid. Explained to us that he loved it. After losing his wife and kids to those things, I can imagine why. His eyes got big and he broke down and said the story that would stick to me the rest of my life. It was morning. He was in the Lower East Side. On his meager salary, he could only afford a small duplex. They were making breakfast. Their little daughter was eating pancakes at the table, getting ready for school, and the wife was in there cooking with him. He was, of course, getting his uniform on, getting ready to go work at the prison. And that's when things got worse. Several knocks on the door started to happen, and living in the ghetto, you always got to make sure that there's nothing bad going on out there. He peeked out the window and didn't see anybody, and he opened the door. He looked around and didn't notice a thing, and turned around and asked him if they were expecting something or somebody, and that's when it happened. They burst through the door and pushed him down against the ground and started to bite at him. Two more passed him and went to the kitchen and attacked his little daughter. They said it was like two pit bulls getting a hold of a rag doll, just ripping her apart. Biting her in the face and hearing her scream, those high-pitched little kid screams. Asking for her mother and her father to come and get her. The mother took one of the hot pans and hit one of them in the head, but it got back up and bit her in the back of the leg and took her down and started eating her. The father had put a bullet between the one that was on him, and it was right between the eyes, and killed him. The bullet got everywhere. He ended up killing the two assailants and locking the door back. And he looked at his little daughter and his wife. His wife had been bitten right below the chin, right at the neck, and so she was bleeding. Gagging on her own blood, she sat there with her eyes wide looking into her husband's face, trying to point her over to the daughter to see if she was okay. It was quite harrowing to hear that the mother wasn't even concerned with herself. He said he dropped to his knees and didn't know what to do. He was holding both of their hands and crying incoherently. He said he held his little baby girl and looked at her and tried to keep her quiet and tell her everything was okay, but he said the amount of bites had disfigured her face and her arms. She died just a few seconds later with her little hand in his. Blood all over him. I can't imagine what a father would be like with the kid that he made and raised. No more Christmas, no more Thanksgiving, no more cute little breakfasts like that. His wife died shortly after. And he sat there, he said, for days. Just staring at them. No sleep. His tears streaming down his eyes until he couldn't cry anymore. He went upstairs and grabbed his rifle, made his way downtown. He was going to jump off one of the buildings. He didn't want to shoot himself because he had too much respect for his own stupid gun. He shot a few of the dead, found some sort of coping mechanism for killing the dead, and started doing that. It brought a smile to his face. But then he started to notice survivors wandering around, scurrying around like he said were rats. He likened them to little animals looking for scraps. Too afraid to come out where the big bad crows were, afraid they would carry them away and eat them. Made a little game of it. He had a little chalkboard where he would shoot the dead and tally up points. And he would shoot the living for more. He had said he had convinced himself that if no one of his family was going to live, then nobody could. If he couldn't be happy, no one could. And he did it with a smile on his face, he said. All the while I'm shaking, in anger my eyes wide. Tears streaming down my eyes from hearing such an evil man, somebody who had gone through so much but had gone such a wrong way. With a smile on his face, completely disregarding the bullet wounds, he said he would do it again in a heartbeat. How could a man of justice turn into something of a monster, the people that he wanted to kill, the people he wanted to put away? And now he's turning into that. It was an amazing sight, to say the least, and something that I said would stick with me for the rest of my life, and it is. The nightmarish look in his eyes will haunt me for the rest of my life, I'm sure. Orville went over to let him down because he was clearly bleeding out, but I wasn't done with him. Orville went over to grab some of the supplies that he had set up and load the bag, and I grabbed him by the shirt, still smiling and snickering about it. I got close to his face, even with that devilish sneer on my face. As I growled, I told him that his last few minutes on this world would not be pleasant. And I made sure of it. I took two of my larger knives and held him down and stuck them through his hands until he couldn't move. Essentially crucified him to the floor or to the ceiling of the building. He screamed in agony. Orville then came over to try and get me to get off of him and just let him die as he is, trying to tell me that I was bigger than that, and I pushed Orville away. I grabbed my big kukri and I proceeded to scalp him. I cut the top of it off all the while he was still alive. I enjoyed it quite a bit because as I was sawing through his head, he was trying to struggle to get me to quit. One of his arms got free with the knife still sticking in his hands. He was trying to grab me by the neck. With an intense, soulless look in my eyes, I saw it through even more. He then began to seize from the pain and eventually died as I was cutting through. After I cut his scalp off, I then proceeded to stab him as many times as I could. I was so angry I couldn't think straight. My eyes were darting from left to right. Smashed his head with the butt of the blade and kept going and going and going, and then Orville grabbed me and punched me in the face and told me to get off of him. He grabbed me up by the collar and asked me what the hell I was doing. I couldn't answer him with tears streaming down my eyes and anger gritting my teeth. I'd bitten a hole completely through my lip. With the blade in one hand and the scalp in the other, I dropped both of them on the ground. I looked over at the body and I looked in horror. My breathing got so deep. Now I realized that we're only seconds away from what the scientists say from going prehistoric, primal. And I realized that I was no better than any of those murderers. And after looking at what I did to that body, I can honestly say I was no better. Orville told me that I better get cleaned up and we'll never talk about this again. But he told me if I don't get my shit straight, he wouldn't think twice about killing me. I figured after hearing what that man had to say, he probably figured that nobody was any better. Judging by what I just did, that I'd be on the path of doing the same thing. I collected myself and got my stuff back, and we made our way back down. Again, walking through the entrails and the mess that was our friend. It definitely wasn't something that I was very proud of. But it was done. It's amazing how a bolt storm clears up. All is quiet, just like a real storm. You sure are glad you made it through.